I slowed the car as the Whitmore house came into view through the trees. My foot eased off the gas pedal almost on its own, like it always did when I passed this spot. The old Victorian mansion sat back from the road, partially hidden behind decades of untamed forest growth, its windows dark and empty like hollow eye sockets. One day, I whispered to myself, running my thumb over the steering wheel. I'd been saying that for months now. Every weekend drive through this part of town led to the same ritual, slowing down, staring, promising myself that someday I'd get inside those walls. The place had become my white whale since I'd started urban exploring 2 years ago. I'd documented abandoned factories, forgotten subway stations, and even a decommissioned mental hospital, but the Whitmore house remained unconquered. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Scott's name flashed on the screen with a text. "We still on for tonight?" I smiled and kept driving, already planning what to tell my friends. It was time to stop driving past and finally go inside. 3 days later, I stood in my living room facing Scott, Gary, and Sophia. I'd spent the entire afternoon working on them, showing photos I'd taken of the house's exterior, sharing the scraps of history I'd uncovered about the place. "Look, I know it's short notice, but the weather's perfect," I said, trying to keep my voice casual even though my stomach was doing flips. "Clear skies, no rain forecast. We could be in and out in 2 hours." Scott crossed his arms. "You've been talking about this place for months, Braden. Why the sudden urgency?" "Because he's obsessed," Gary said, adjusting his glasses. "And because he knows I'm leaving town next week for that conference." Sophia leaned forward in her chair. "I'm in. That place looks amazing." "Of course you're in," Gary said with a smirk. "You think every creaky floorboard is a ghost." "I just appreciate history," she shot back. Scott sighed, running a hand through his wavy hair. "Fine. But we stay together the whole time, and we're out before dark." I tried not to look too excited as I grabbed my camera bag. Deal. An hour later, I turned my Jeep onto the overgrown dirt road that led to the Whitmore property. The October afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the windshield. The road hadn't been maintained in years. Weeds sprouted between tire tracks, and branches scraped against the sides of the vehicle. "Jesus, Braden," Scott said from the passenger seat. "How did you even find this place?" "County records," I answered, navigating around a pothole. "It's been abandoned for 15 years. The last owners just disappeared one day, left everything behind." "Left everything behind?" Sophia repeated from the back seat. "Like their clothes and photos and stuff?" "That's what they say." I slowed the Jeep to a stop about 50 yards from the house. "We'll walk from here, less chance of someone on the main road spotting the car." We climbed out, and I grabbed my backpack, checking that I had everything: camera, extra batteries, flashlights, water bottles. Gary looked up at the sky, squinting at the sun. 2 hours, max, he reminded me. "I'm not getting stuck out here after dark." "We'll be fine," I assured him, though my own stomach tightened as I looked toward the house, barely visible through the trees. I led the way along what had once been a path, now overtaken by underbrush and fallen branches. The forest had reclaimed most of the front yard, with young trees growing where a lawn must have once been. Birds called from the canopy above, but as we got closer to the house, I noticed the sound fading until we walked in complete silence. The Whitmore house stood before us, 3 stories of Victorian architecture, its once white paint now gray and peeling. Dark green ivy crawled up the sides, reaching toward the slate roof. Ornate woodwork, framed windows clouded with dirt and age. The wraparound porch sagged slightly on one side. "Holy shit," Scott whispered. "It's bigger than it looked in your photos." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. My heart hammered against my ribs, partly from excitement, partly from something else I couldn't name. A weight pressed against my chest, making each breath feel like work. "You okay?" Sophia asked, touching my arm. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. Just excited we're finally doing this. We approached the front steps, testing each one before putting our full weight down. The wood creaked but held firm. Standing before the front door, I felt that strange dread again, stronger now. My hand hesitated on the tarnished brass doorknob. "What's wrong?" Gary asked. "Having second thoughts?" I shook my head and pushed against the door, expecting resistance. To my surprise, it swung open with barely a sound, as if the hinges had been recently oiled. "That's weird," I said. "I thought we'd need to find a way to break in." "Maybe someone's been here recently," Scott suggested, peering past me into the dim interior. "Or maybe it's a sign we're welcome," Sophia added with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I stepped across the threshold first, the floorboards solid beneath my feet. The air inside felt different, heavier somehow, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. I breathed through my mouth, tasting dust and something else I couldn't identify. "Guys, check this out," I called back, my voice sounding strangely muffled. The others followed me inside, and we stood in the entrance hall looking around in amazement. I'd expected decay, water damage, collapsed ceilings, rotted floors, but the interior was remarkably preserved. A grand staircase curved up to the second floor. Doorways led off to what looked like a living room on the left and a dining room on the right. Furniture sat draped in sheets, ghostly white shapes in the dim light. "This can't be right," Gary said, pulling out his phone to use as a flashlight. "If this place has been abandoned for 15 years, it should be in much worse condition." I nodded, unslinging my camera. "That's what makes it so perfect. We hit the urban explorer jackpot." But even as I said it, something felt off. The air was thick, making each breath an effort. The house seemed to absorb sound, creating a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. I raised my camera and started taking photos, the familiar action helping to steady my nerves. "It feels like someone could walk in any minute," Scott said, running his finger along a sideboard and examining the dust. "Like they just locked up and went on vacation." Sophia pulled back one of the sheet covers, revealing an ornate Victorian sofa. "The furniture looks expensive. Why would anyone leave all this behind?" "That's what we're here to figure out," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I moved further into the house, camera in hand, determined to document everything. The oppressive feeling followed me, like an invisible weight pressing down from all sides. Each room we entered felt more suffocating than the last, the air growing thicker, harder to pull into my lungs. My excitement battled with an increasing sense of unease, but I pushed it aside. This was what I'd been waiting for, my biggest exploration challenge yet. "Let's check out the rest of the first floor before heading upstairs," I suggested, my voice sounding strange in the heavy silence. "We need to be systematic about this." "Whatever you say," Scott replied, staying close behind me. "Just remember, 2 hours and we're out." I nodded, focusing my camera on a dusty chandelier hanging in the hallway. The lens captured what my eyes couldn't fully process, the strange preservation of a house that time seemed to have forgotten. Despite the dust and stillness, nothing felt truly abandoned here. It felt more like the house was waiting, holding its breath. For what, I didn't know. But as I moved deeper inside, camera clicking, documenting everything, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Whitmore house was somehow aware of our presence. I led the way across the main floor, camera raised to capture the strange time capsule we'd discovered. Every few steps, I stopped to take another shot, documenting the preserved interior that seemed frozen in time. "This place is unreal," I said, lowering my camera to look around the living room. "Look at how everything's set up, like someone just got up to grab something from another room." The furniture arrangement was casual, but lived in. A book lay open on the coffee table, face down with its spine cracked. A throw blanket was bunched at one end of the couch, and 2 mugs sat on coasters nearby. Gary stayed near the doorway, arms crossed. Still doesn't explain why nobody came to clean this place out. Family members, banks, somebody should have claimed all this stuff. I moved toward what looked like a dining room, the hardwood floors creaking beneath my boots. The table was set for 4 people with plates, silverware, and cloth napkins. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise it seemed ready for dinner. Maybe they didn't have family, Sophia suggested, following close behind me. Or maybe something happened that made people too afraid to come back. I snapped a few more photos. County records didn't show much, just that the last owners were the Millers, husband, wife, and teenage son. We continued through a swinging door into the kitchen. The space was modest but well equipped with older appliances. What caught my attention immediately were the dishes in the sink. Plates with crusty food residue, glasses with dried liquid rings at the bottom, utensils piled haphazardly. "Who leaves without washing their dishes?" Gary asked, peering over my shoulder. "Someone in a hurry," I said, raising my camera again. Sophia pointed to the wall. "Look at that!" A calendar hung beside the refrigerator. I stepped closer, brushing away a cobweb to see it better. October 2008. The first week had X marks through each day, stopping at the 8th. October 8th, I said. That must have been when they left. Or when something happened to them, Sophia added quietly. Scott shook his head. Let's not jump to conclusions. People abandon houses for normal reasons all the time. Foreclosures, job relocations, family emergencies. I continued taking photos, moving slowly around the kitchen. The refrigerator door was closed but not completely shut. I thought about opening it, but decided against it. 15-year-old food wasn't something I wanted to see or smell. "Hey guys," Sophia called from the far side of the kitchen. "Check this out." She stood by what looked like a back door, pointing to something on the wall. As we gathered around, I saw she'd found a small key rack. 3 brass keys hung from hooks, gleaming in the fading afternoon light. "That's weird," I said, leaning closer. "Everything else is covered in dust, but these look polished," Gary finished, "like someone's been using them." Sophia carefully lifted one key from its hook, or cleaning them. The key was ornate with an intricate pattern on its bow. It looked old-fashioned, the kind you might expect in a Victorian house like this. "Maybe we should check what they open," I suggested, my curiosity overriding the growing unease I felt. We examined the back door first, but none of the keys fit its modern lock. Moving back through the kitchen, we checked cabinets and drawers, but found nothing that required these particular keys. "There's another door here," I said, noticing a heavy wooden door tucked into an alcove between the kitchen and what appeared to be a pantry. The door was solid oak with black iron hinges and a keyhole that looked promising. Sophia handed me the keys, and I tried each one until the largest slid smoothly into the lock. It turned with barely a sound, and the door swung open to reveal a staircase leading down. "Basement time," I said, reaching for my backpack to grab a flashlight. Gary hung back. "I don't know, man. We've already seen plenty for your photo collection. We still have over an hour before our time limit," I reminded him. "And this is exactly the kind of thing urban explorers look for. Hidden spaces, untouched areas." Scott looked at his watch. "He's right. We've got time." I clicked on my flashlight and led the way down the stairs. They were solid wood, not the rickety basement steps I'd expected. My light beam bounced off walls that appeared to be finished with drywall and paint rather than the exposed foundation I anticipated. When I reached the bottom, I swept my flashlight around and froze. This wasn't a typical basement. It was a large, open room with hardwood floors that matched the upstairs. But what made my breath catch wasn't the unexpected finish work. It was the mannequins. Dozens of them filled the space, arranged throughout the room in various poses and groupings. Some sat at small tables as if engaged in conversation. Others stood against walls, arms at their sides or raised in greeting. A group of 4 surrounded a piano, one positioned on the bench with hands poised over the keys. "What the hell?" Scott whispered behind me. I raised my camera and started taking photos, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. The mannequins weren't modern retail displays. They had an antique quality, hand-painted features, jointed limbs, realistic glass eyes. Most disturbing was their clothing. Each wore outfits from different time periods: Victorian dresses with high collars and bustles, men's suits from the 1920s with wide lapels, clothing from the 1950s, 1970s, and more recent styles too. "This is some collector-level obsession," Gary said, keeping his distance from the nearest figures. Sophia had gone completely still beside me. When I turned to look at her, her face had drained of color. She grabbed my arm with surprising strength, her fingers digging in. "Sophia, you okay?" I asked. She didn't answer, just stared at the mannequins with wide eyes, trembling visibly. I'd never seen her react this way to anything before, not even during our most unsettling explorations. "Maybe we should go back up," I suggested, genuinely concerned by her reaction. The air down here felt different from upstairs, heavier, more oppressive, and there was a smell I couldn't quite identify. Not just dust and old house, but something else. Something that made my stomach tighten and roll. "They're watching us," Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. I looked back at the mannequins. In the beam of my flashlight, their glass eyes did seem to reflect light in a way that created the illusion of awareness. Their fixed expressions, some smiling, others neutral or stern, took on an uncanny quality in the dim light. "They're just mannequins," Scott said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. I continued taking photos, moving deeper into the room. The basement was much larger than the footprint of the house should have allowed. Corridors branched off the main space, leading to smaller rooms that also contained mannequins in various scenes. A dining room setup, a mock living room, what looked like a classroom with child-sized figures at desks. "How many of these things are there?" Gary asked, following reluctantly. "Too many," I answered, counting at least 30 in the main room alone. I noticed details that made my skin crawl. A mannequin wearing a Letterman jacket with the local high school's logo. Another in a police uniform that looked relatively recent. A female figure in a wedding dress holding hands with a male mannequin in a tuxedo. Sophia hadn't let go of my arm, and her trembling had gotten worse. "Braden, please," she said. "Let's go back upstairs." I nodded, suddenly eager to leave this strange collection behind. We'd been in the basement for about 20 minutes, but it felt much longer. The heaviness in the air seemed to press down on us, making it harder to breathe. "Yeah, I think we've seen enough," I agreed, turning back toward the stairs. Scott and Gary were already heading that way, clearly as unsettled as we were. We climbed the stairs quickly, and I felt immediate relief when we stepped back into the kitchen. I closed the basement door firmly behind us and turned the key in the lock. Sophia released my arm but stayed close. "That was wrong," she said quietly. Something about those mannequins was wrong. The whole setup was bizarre, Scott agreed. Who collects that many mannequins and dresses them up like that? Gary checked his watch. "We've still got some time before our 2-hour limit. Should we check out the upstairs?" I hesitated, looking back at the locked door. The basement had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Those mannequins, arranged like living people frozen in time, had triggered something primal in my brain. A warning signal I couldn't quite articulate. "Yeah," I said finally, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Let's see what's upstairs." I watched Scott and Gary disappear up the grand staircase, their footsteps creating hollow thuds against the aged wood. Each step they took seemed to make the house shift around us, the sound bouncing off walls and returning distorted. "You sure you don't want to go with them?" I asked Sophia, who stood beside me in the entrance hall. She shook her head, her ponytail swaying slightly. "I'm still feeling weird after the basement. Let's check out the rest of this floor first." I nodded, understanding her reluctance. The basement had left me unsettled too, though I couldn't stop thinking about what other secrets this house might hold. My camera hung heavy around my neck, full of images of those mannequins arranged in their frozen tableaus. "There's a room we haven't checked yet," Sophia said, pointing to a closed door off the main hallway. We walked across the entrance hall, our feet leaving tracks in the dust. The floorboards creaked under our weight, but not as much as they should have in a house this old. When Sophia pushed the door open, it swung inward without a sound, revealing what looked like a study. The room was smaller than the others we'd seen, with dark wood-paneled walls and a large desk positioned near a window. Bookshelves lined 3 walls from floor to ceiling, packed with leather-bound volumes. A reading chair sat in one corner with a small table beside it. "This looks like something out of an old movie," I said, raising my camera to capture the scene. Sophia moved deeper into the room, running her fingers along the spines of books. "These are really old. First editions, maybe." I joined her at the shelves, noticing the titles, mostly classics and historical texts. As I photographed the collection, Sophia continued exploring the room, examining the desk and its contents. "Brayden," she called suddenly, her voice tight with excitement. "Come look at this." She stood by one of the bookshelves, her hand pressed against the wall beside it. When I got closer, I saw she was pushing on a section of wood paneling that looked identical to the rest. "I felt a draft coming from behind here," she explained, "and this part of the panel feels different." I ran my hand over the spot she indicated. The wood felt smoother, newer somehow, and there was a slight give when I pressed against it. "There might be a mechanism," I said, examining the bookshelf more carefully. My fingers traced the ornate carvings along the frame until I felt something shift under my touch. A small wooden knob disguised as part of the decoration. When I turned it, we heard a click. The section of bookshelf swung inward a few inches. "Holy shit," I whispered, stepping back. "It's a hidden door." Sophia grabbed my arm, her eyes wide. "Like a secret room?" I nodded, my heart racing with excitement. This was exactly the kind of discovery that made urban exploring worth it. I pulled the bookshelf door wider, revealing a dark opening beyond. "Should we wait for the guys?" Sophia asked, peering into the darkness. I shook my head, already reaching for my flashlight. "We'll check it out quick, and then tell them what we found." The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a room about the size of the study we were in. I stepped through the doorway with Sophia close behind me. "Oh my God," she breathed. The hidden room contained a large oval dining table surrounded by 12 chairs, each one occupied by a mannequin. Unlike the basement collection, these figures were arranged in a specific scene, a formal dinner party, frozen in time. I swept my flashlight across the tablescape. Fine china plates, crystal glasses, and silver cutlery were laid out before each mannequin. Candelabras with half-melted candles stood at intervals down the center of the table. The whole setup was covered in a thin layer of dust that sparkled in my flashlight beam. "They're dressed differently," Sophia whispered, moving slowly around the perimeter of the room. She was right. Each mannequin wore formal attire from what looked like different time periods. One female figure near the head of the table wore a Victorian-style gown with high collar and bustle. Across from her sat a mannequin in what appeared to be a 1920s tuxedo. Further down, I spotted clothing styles from the 50s, 70s, and more recent decades. "It's like they collected people from different eras," I said, raising my camera. The flash illuminated the room briefly, casting sharp shadows across the mannequins' blank faces. "Don't say it like that," Sophia said, wrapping her arms around herself. "This is creepy enough already." I moved around the table, taking photos from different angles. One mannequin particularly caught my attention. A figure wearing modern formal wear that looked barely a few years old. Its hands were positioned as if raising a toast, frozen mid-gesture. "Look at this one," I said, pointing. The clothes look brand new compared to some of the others. Sophia didn't answer. When I glanced over, she was staring at a mannequin wearing a dress that could have come from a department store last season. "What's wrong?" I asked. "That necklace," she said, pointing to a pendant around the mannequin's neck. "I swear I've seen something just like it before." Before I could respond, a loud crash sounded from upstairs, making both of us jump. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of furniture being dragged across the floor, a heavy scraping noise that seemed to vibrate through the ceiling. "Scott! Gary?" I called out, moving back toward the hidden door. My voice sounded small and muffled in the secret room. The scraping continued for several seconds, punctuated by what sounded like something heavy falling over. "What are they doing up there?" Sophia asked, her voice tight with worry. I stepped back into the study and called out again, louder this time. "Scott! Gary, everything okay?" No response came, just more dragging sounds, then a thud that shook dust from the ceiling. "We should check on them," I said, heading for the door to the hallway. As we reached the entrance hall, the noises suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was so complete, so absolute, it made my ears ring. It felt like the house had been holding its breath and suddenly released it. "Scott!" I called again, looking up the staircase. My voice seemed to travel nowhere, as if the air itself had thickened. Sophia grabbed my arm. "Something's wrong." I nodded, feeling a cold weight settling in my stomach. The oppressive atmosphere I'd felt since entering the house had intensified, pressing down on us from all sides. The air felt heavier, harder to breathe. "Maybe they found something interesting and got distracted," I suggested, not believing it myself. "They would have answered," Sophia said. She was right. Scott always responded when called. It was something I'd teased him about before, his inability to ignore his name. And the noises we'd heard didn't sound like normal exploration. It sounded like a struggle. I took a step toward the stairs, then hesitated. Something about the second floor suddenly seemed threatening, as if the house itself was warning us away. "We should go up there," I said, trying to convince myself as much as Sophia. But I couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. My friends had gone upstairs less than 30 minutes ago, and now they weren't answering our calls after making sounds that suggested something had gone very wrong. I stared up the staircase, my concern for Scott and Gary battling with an instinctive fear I couldn't explain. The house seemed to watch us, waiting for our next move, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened to my friends, we might be next. I headed up the grand staircase with Sophia right behind me. My legs felt heavy with each step, like my body was fighting against the decision to go upstairs. "Scott? Gary?" I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I wanted. The second floor opened to a wide hallway with several closed doors. Dust motes floated in shafts of late afternoon light coming through tall windows at each end of the corridor. The floorboards creaked under our weight. "They have to be up here somewhere," I said, more to reassure myself than Sophia. "Let's check every room." I tried the first door on our right. The knob turned easily, and the door swung open to reveal what looked like the master bedroom. A large four-poster bed dominated the center of the room, its covers rumpled as if someone had just gotten up. The pillows still held the impression of a head. "This doesn't make sense," I said, stepping inside. "Look at this bed. It looks like someone slept here recently." Sophia stayed in the doorway. Maybe Scott and Gary were messing around, trying to scare us? I shook my head. They wouldn't do that. I moved to the adjoining bathroom and pushed the door open. Fresh towels hung on a rack beside the shower, one of them slightly damp to the touch. The medicine cabinet mirror was partially fogged, with what looked like a handprint smudged in the condensation. "Someone used this bathroom today," I said, my throat tightening. "These towels are still damp." I returned to the bedroom and checked under the bed, in the closet, behind the heavy curtains, anywhere someone might hide. Nothing. We moved methodically through the second floor. A child's bedroom with model airplanes hanging from the ceiling, a home office with papers still scattered across the desk, a guest room with perfectly made beds. Each space felt recently occupied, yet completely empty of our friends. "Scott! Gary, this isn't funny!" I shouted, my voice echoing down the hallway. Sophia pointed to stairs at the end of the hall. "There's another floor. We should check up there too." I nodded, then hesitated. "Maybe we should stick together. We'll cover more ground if we split up," she said. "I'll check the third floor. You finish looking around here." Before I could argue, she headed for the stairs. I watched her ascend until she disappeared from view, then turned back to finish searching the second floor. I opened the last door we hadn't checked, finding a linen closet filled with neatly folded sheets and blankets. I pushed them aside, looking for any hidden compartment or passage, finding nothing but the back wall of the closet. "Scott! Gary!" I called again, listening for any response. The silence of the house pressed against my ears. I stood in the hallway, turning slowly, trying to think of where else they could be. The house didn't seem large enough for two grown men to completely vanish. I heard footsteps on the stairs and turned to see Sophia coming back down. Her face had gone pale and she moved with quick, jerky steps. "Did you find anything?" I asked. She shook her head. "Empty rooms and more mannequins. They're set up in little scenes like the ones in the basement. One room has them arranged like a classroom. Another has them sitting around a TV. But no sign of Scott or Gary. Nothing." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't like this place, Brayton. Something's wrong here." I pulled out my phone. "I'm going to try calling them." We headed back downstairs to the main floor. The house seemed darker now, the late afternoon light fading as evening approached. I pulled up Scott's number and hit call. We stood in tense silence, waiting. A faint ringtone sounded from somewhere in the house. I turned, trying to locate the source. "You hear that?" I asked. Sophia nodded. "It's coming from... I can't tell." I moved toward the living room, following the sound. It seemed to shift, never coming from a consistent direction. I pressed my ear against the wall, and the ringtone grew louder. "It's in the wall," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Scott's phone is inside the wall." I ended the call and immediately dialed Gary's number. Again, a ringtone sounded, different from Scott's, and again it seemed to come from within the walls themselves, this time from a different section of the house. "This is impossible," I said, my heart racing. "How could their phones be in the walls?" Sophia tugged at my sleeve. "Brayden, look." She pointed toward the fireplace. Something red was wedged between two floorboards near the hearth. We moved closer and my stomach dropped. It was a red sneaker. Scott's distinctive red sneaker, the one he'd been wearing when we arrived. I knelt down and tried to pull it free, but it was firmly stuck. The shoe was wedged at an odd angle, as if it had been pulled down through a gap in the floorboards that was too small for it to pass through completely. "It's Scott's," I said, my voice cracking. "These are the shoes he was wearing today." I examined the floorboards more closely. Deep scratch marks surrounded the area where the shoe was trapped, as if something had clawed at the wood. The marks looked fresh, the exposed wood lighter than the surrounding floor. "It looks like it was pulled through from below," Sophia said, her voice shaking. "But that's not possible. The floor is solid." I pressed my hands against the surrounding boards, looking for any that might be loose or hiding a trapdoor. All of them were firmly in place. I ran my fingers along the scratches, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Maybe there's another hidden room we missed," I suggested, though I didn't believe it myself. "Some kind of space between the floors?" I tapped on different sections of the floor, listening for any hollow sound that might indicate a cavity beneath. Everything sounded solid. "How does a shoe get pulled through a solid floor?" I asked, not expecting an answer. "And where are Scott and Gary?" My hands were shaking as I continued to examine the shoe and the surrounding floorboards. No matter how carefully I looked, I couldn't find any mechanism or hidden passage that would explain how Scott's shoe had become trapped this way. "We need to get help," Sophia said. "We need to get out of here and call the police." I nodded slowly, unable to tear my eyes away from the red sneaker. The house seemed to close in around us, the air growing thicker with each passing moment. Whatever had happened to Scott and Gary, I was beginning to fear we wouldn't find them by searching the house ourselves. I ran down the porch steps with Sophia right behind me, not stopping until we reached the tree line. My lungs burned with each breath of cold October air. I turned back to look at the house, its windows dark and empty, watching us with patient malice. "They have to be somewhere," I said, my voice breaking as I spun in a circle, scanning the property. "Scott! Gary!" My shouts echoed through the trees, met with nothing but silence. Sophia stood beside me, arms wrapped around herself. "Braden, look." She pointed toward where we had parked. I followed her gesture and felt my stomach drop. Gary's blue Honda was gone. Only my Jeep remained parked at the edge of the overgrown path. "That's impossible," I whispered. "We would have heard them start the car." I jogged over to the spot where Gary had parked, finding only flattened weeds and tire tracks leading back toward the main road. I crouched down, touching the indentations in the soil. They seemed fresh. "Maybe they got scared and left," Sophia suggested, though her tone made it clear she didn't believe it. "Without telling us? Without texting? Without even starting the car where we could hear it?" I stood up, pulling out my phone again. "And what about Scott's shoe? People don't leave one shoe behind when they take off." I tried calling both their numbers again. Scott's phone still rang somewhere inside the house walls. Gary's went straight to voicemail. "I'm calling the police," Sophia said, already dialing on her phone. Her hands shook so badly she had to try twice. While she spoke to the dispatcher, I walked the perimeter of the clearing, shouting for Scott and Gary every few steps. I checked behind trees, looked for footprints, any sign they might have come this way. The forest floor was covered in fallen leaves that crackled under my feet, making it impossible to track anything. Sophia joined me after ending her call. "They're sending someone, but it might take a while. We're pretty far out." I nodded, unable to stop moving. "I need to keep looking. Braden, we should stay by the cars. What if they come back and we're gone too?" "They're not coming back," I said, the words tasting bitter. "Something happened to them in there." Despite Sophia's protests, I spent the next 40 minutes searching the surrounding woods, calling their names until my voice grew hoarse. I found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign anyone had passed through the dense undergrowth. Eventually, I returned to the Jeep where Sophia waited, huddled in the passenger seat with the heater running. "Any luck?" she asked as I climbed in. I shook my head, staring at the house through the windshield. The afternoon sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the property. The Victorian structure looked almost peaceful from this distance, like any abandoned home slowly returning to nature. "What did you tell the police?" I asked. "That our friends disappeared inside an abandoned house and we can't find them." Sophia's voice was flat. "I told them about the shoe in the floor and the phones ringing in the walls. The dispatcher thought I was making it up." We sat in silence, watching the house and waiting. The minutes stretched into an hour, each tick of the dashboard clock a reminder that Scott and Gary remained missing. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a text, a call, anything to explain what had happened. Finally, a police cruiser pulled up behind my Jeep. A single officer stepped out. Tall, solidly built, with short, dark hair and a carefully maintained uniform. His name badge read Ray. I got out of the Jeep to meet him. "Officer Ray, I'm Braden Harper. Thank you for coming." "Jorge Ray," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, Professional. You reported missing persons? Yes, 2 of our friends. They were exploring the house with us and just disappeared. Officer Ray looked past me at the house, his expression revealing nothing. And you said one of them left his shoe? It's stuck in the floor, I explained, aware of how crazy it sounded. Like it was pulled through from underneath, but the floor is solid. And their phones, we can hear them ringing inside the walls. He nodded, making a note in a small notebook. Let's take a look. I led Officer Ray toward the house with Sophia trailing behind us. As we approached the porch, I noticed he kept one hand near his holster, a small gesture that somehow validated my fear. We were urban exploring, I explained as we climbed the porch steps. I'm a photographer. I document abandoned places. You know that's trespassing, Officer Ray said, though his tone suggested this was the least of his concerns right now. I know. I'm sorry. The front door remained open as we'd left it in our rush to escape. Officer Ray entered first, flashlight drawn despite the remaining daylight filtering through dirty windows. The entrance hall looked exactly as before. Dust-covered furniture, grand staircase, oppressive silence. Scott and Gary went upstairs, I said, pointing. Sophia and I stayed down here for a while, exploring. We heard a crash from upstairs, furniture moving. When we called out, they didn't answer. Officer Ray moved methodically through the first floor, checking each room before approaching the stairs. I followed close behind, pointing out the study and the hidden room behind the bookshelf. He examined the mannequin dinner party with professional detachment. These are creepy, he commented, shining his light on their dusty faces, but not illegal. When we reached the living room, I showed him Scott's red sneaker wedged between the floorboards. Officer Ray crouched down, examining it carefully without touching it. This is your friend's shoe? Yes, Scott's. He was wearing them today. Officer Ray tested the surrounding floorboards, tapping with his flashlight and pressing with his boot. He tried to wiggle the shoe free but couldn't. This doesn't make any sense, he muttered. That's what I've been saying. We continued to the basement door. I handed Officer Ray the brass key, watching as he unlocked it and descended the stairs, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The mannequins stood in their eerie tableaus, exactly as we'd left them. Your friends aren't down here, he said after a thorough search. They weren't here earlier either. This is just part of what makes this place so weird. We checked the entire second floor next, room by room. Officer Ray called out for Scott and Gary, his authoritative voice echoing through empty spaces. We even went to the third floor, finding only the mannequin scenes Sophia had described. After 2 hours of searching, Officer Ray radioed for backup. More officers arrived, along with a detective named Sadie Luna, a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. The house was searched again, more thoroughly this time. They took pictures of Scott's shoe, measured doorways, checked for hidden passages or trap doors. They found nothing. As night fell, portable lights were set up outside. I sat on the porch steps with Sophia, watching police officers comb the surrounding forest with flashlights. Detective Luna approached us, notepad in hand. I need you both to come to the station tomorrow to give formal statements, she said. For now, tell me everything that happened today, from the beginning. We recounted our story again, the exploration, the mannequins, the sounds from upstairs, the missing car, the shoe in the floor, the ringing phones in the walls. Detective Luna wrote everything down without comment, though I could see the skepticism in her eyes. Did your friends have any reason to leave suddenly? She asked. No, I insisted. And they wouldn't have left without telling us. What about the car? Could they have walked somewhere else after parking it elsewhere? In the middle of nowhere? 5 miles from town? I shook my head. And why would they do that? Detective Luna had no answers. Eventually, she told us we could go home, but to remain available. I handed over my camera with all the photos I'd taken inside the house. This might help, I said. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of police interviews, search parties, and sleepless nights. I met with Detective Luna 4 separate times, going over every detail again and again. The photos from my camera showed the house interior, the mannequins, the hidden dining room, everything except Scott and Gary. There was no evidence of what had happened to them. Search teams combed the surrounding forest for miles but found nothing. No footprints, no clothing, no signs of struggle. Scott's parents drove in from out of state, staying at a local hotel while the search continued. Gary's sister flew in from Chicago. I met them both, trying to explain what had happened while leaving out the more inexplicable details. 3 weeks after that day at the house, my phone rang at 2 a.m. I answered immediately, having barely slept anyway. "Braden, this is Detective Luna." I sat up in bed. "Did you find them?" "We found Gary's car." Her voice was carefully neutral. "It was pulled from Miller's Pond about an hour ago." My heart sank. "Miller's Pond? That's 5 miles from the house." "Yes. A fisherman spotted it this morning when the fog lifted. We sent divers down right away." I swallowed hard. "And?" "The car was empty, windows rolled down, doors unlocked, no sign of your friends." I tried to process this information. That doesn't make any sense. How did the car get there? Why would they roll down the windows? "We're trying to figure that out. I wanted you to know before you heard it elsewhere." She paused. "The search is continuing, but I need to be honest with you. This doesn't look good." After hanging up, I sat in the dark of my apartment, turning her words over in my mind. Gary's car at the bottom of a pond, windows down, doors unlocked, no bodies. It was impossible. All of it was impossible. Scott's shoe couldn't be pulled through solid floorboards. Phones couldn't ring inside walls. People couldn't vanish without a trace. Yet they had. The first call came 3 days after they pulled Gary's car from Miller's Pond. I was lying on my couch in the dark, staring at the ceiling when my phone lit up the room. Scott's name flashed across the screen. My heart stopped. I fumbled for the phone, nearly dropping it before answering. "Scott! Scott, where are you?" Static filled my ear, crackling and popping like an old radio struggling to find a station. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, straining to hear anything beyond the noise. "Scott, can you hear me?" The static shifted, revealing something underneath. Voices, distant, muffled, like people talking in another room. I couldn't make out words, just the cadence of conversation rising and falling. "Scott! Gary! Is that you? Where are you?" The static surged, drowning out the voices before the call disconnected. I sat up, breathing hard, and tried calling back. It rang and rang until voicemail picked up. Scott's cheerful greeting felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't sleep after that. I paced my apartment until dawn, checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for it to ring again. The calls kept coming over the next few weeks. Sometimes from Scott's number, sometimes from Gary's. Always the same. Static and distant voices that I could never quite understand. After the 5th call, I started recording them, hoping I might catch something if I played it back later. I never did. Something about the calls felt wrong, beyond the obvious. I checked my phone's location tracking feature, scrolling through the log of incoming calls. Each one had coordinates attached to it. When I plugged them into a map, my stomach dropped. Every call came from the same location, the Whitmore house. I showed Detective Luna the call logs during our next meeting. She took notes, her face giving away nothing. "We'll look into it," she said, sliding my phone back across her desk. "But phone GPS can be unreliable, especially in rural areas. The signal could be bouncing off towers miles away." "All of them?" "Every single call shows the exact same coordinates." She sighed, setting down her pen. "Mr. Harper, we're doing everything we can to find your friends. But chasing phone signals that might be glitches isn't going to help us locate them." I left the station feeling like I was the only one who understood what was happening. The only one who knew the house had taken Scott and Gary. The next evening, my phone rang again. This time it was Sophia. I answered immediately. "Braden," she said, her voice high and tight. "Braden, I need you to come over. Right now." "What happened? Are you okay? Just come over, please." 20 minutes later, I knocked on her apartment door. She opened it immediately, like she'd been standing right behind it, waiting. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "Look," she said, grabbing my wrist and pulling me inside. She led me to her kitchen table where 3 brass keys lay in a row. "The keys from the house," I said. "How did you—" "They were hanging from my rearview mirror." Her hands shook as she pointed at them. "I got in my car to go to work this morning, and they were just there, hanging from my mirror. That's impossible. We left them in the basement. The police have them." "I know." She pressed her palms against her temples. "I called Detective Luna. She said all the evidence from the house is still in police custody, including the keys they found. These can't be the same ones, but they are. I know they are." I picked up the largest key, the one that had opened the basement door. It felt cold and heavy in my palm, exactly as I remembered. "I haven't been back there," Sophia said. "I haven't been anywhere near that house. How did these get in my car?" I had no answer for her. I pocketed the keys, promising to keep them safe. Though I wasn't sure why, I felt the need to take them. Maybe to spare Sophia from whatever connection they created to the house. On the drive home, I kept glancing at the keys sitting on my passenger seat. They looked ordinary in the passing streetlights. Just 3 old brass keys. But their presence felt wrong, like an intrusion from a place that shouldn't be able to reach into our lives. When I pulled into my apartment complex's parking lot, I noticed something on the passenger seat floor. Mud. Dark clumps of it formed into distinct footprints that hadn't been there when I'd driven to Sophia's place. I leaned over, running my fingers along the edge of one print. It was still damp. The tread pattern looked familiar, the same waffle pattern as Scott's hiking boots, the ones he'd been wearing that day at the house. I scrambled out of my car, heart racing, and looked around the empty parking lot. Nothing moved in the darkness. No one stood watching from the shadows. Just me, alone with impossible footprints in my car. Sleep became a distant memory after that night. I'd lie in bed for hours, staring at my ceiling, my mind racing with questions. What happened to Scott and Gary? How were they calling me? Why were there muddy footprints in my car? What did the house want? When exhaustion finally pulled me under, my dreams were filled with mannequins watching me with painted eyes, their heads slowly turning as I passed. I'd wake gasping, convinced I was trapped inside the house's walls. After a week of this, I knew I needed answers. Not the kind Detective Luna was looking for, but the truth about the Whitmore house itself. If the police wouldn't help me, I'd have to find answers on my own. I started at the County Historical Society, digging through property records and old newspaper archives. The house had been built in 1887 by Edward Whitmore, a wealthy businessman who made his fortune in timber. He lived there with his wife and 3 children until 1903, when the entire family disappeared overnight. The article describing their disappearance was brief, noting only that the family had departed unexpectedly, leaving behind all their belongings. The house remained empty for several years before being purchased by the Miller family in 1910. I traced ownership through the decades, finding a pattern that sent chills down my spine. Every 20 to 30 years, the house's occupants would vanish, leaving no trace except their possessions. Police investigations yielded nothing. No bodies were ever found. The house would sit empty for a while, then new owners would move in, apparently unaware of its history. The most recent owners before our visit had been the Thompsons, husband, wife, and teenage son. They had vanished in 2008, which matched the calendar Sophia had found in the kitchen. The article about their disappearance mentioned the father's car being found abandoned near Miller's Pond, just like Gary's. I printed everything I could find and spread it across my living room floor, creating a timeline of the house and its victims. Dozens of people had vanished over the years, but nothing explained what happened to them. Nothing connected the victims, except the house itself. I called Sophia to share what I'd found, but she cut me off before I could explain. "I can't do this anymore, Braden," she said, her voice flat. "I'm moving back home to stay with my parents for a while. I need to get away from here. But I found something about the house. I don't want to know." Her voice cracked. "I can't sleep. I keep seeing those mannequins watching me. I keep hearing noises in my walls. I need to go somewhere else, somewhere far away from that house." I couldn't blame her. Part of me wanted to run too. But I couldn't leave. Not while Scott and Gary were still missing. Not while the house was still calling me. I expanded my research, looking beyond local sources. I found mentions of similar cases in other states. Houses where people disappeared, leaving everything behind. Places where strange phenomena occurred afterward. Phantom calls, objects moving on their own, footprints appearing from nowhere. But these were all from paranormal websites and forums, nothing official or verified. Nothing that would convince Detective Luna to take another look at the house. Nothing that explained what had happened to my friends. After 2 weeks of research, I had a wall covered in printouts, notes, and red string connecting similar cases. But I was no closer to understanding what had happened. The house had taken Scott and Gary just as it had taken others before them. But how? And why? And most importantly, where were they now? The phone rang again that night. Gary's number. I answered, pressing record on my voice memo app. "Gary, can you hear me?" Static as always. But this time, underneath it, I heard something different. Not distant voices, but a single word, repeated over and over. Mannequins. I drove past the Whitmore house one final time, 6 months after Scott and Gary disappeared. My foot eased off the gas pedal, the car slowing to a crawl as the old Victorian came into view through the trees. Winter had passed and spring had brought new growth to the property, but nothing could hide what stood beyond the overgrown foliage. The house looked exactly as it had that October afternoon, dark windows staring out like empty eye sockets, walls still partially covered with vines that had survived the winter cold. The structure stood tall and imposing against the afternoon sky, its roofline cutting a jagged edge against the blue background. I pulled to the side of the road, my tires crunching on gravel. From here, I could make out the dirt path that led to the clearing where we'd parked that day. My eyes traced the route, seeing the faint impression of tire tracks still visible in the soil. 6 months of rain, snow, and wind hadn't erased them completely. They remained like scars in the earth, a permanent reminder of our arrival and the incomplete departure that followed. My phone rang, startling me. The name on the screen made my stomach tighten. Detective Luna. "Hello?" I answered, keeping my eyes fixed on the house. "Mr. Harper, this is Detective Luna." Her voice sounded tired, resigned. "I wanted to call you personally before you received the official notification." I knew what was coming. The calls had grown less frequent over the months, the updates increasingly sparse. "We're closing the case on Scott Quinn and Gary Montgomery," she said. "I fought to keep it open, but without new evidence." "You can't just stop looking," I said, my voice rising. "They're still out there somewhere." "They'll remain in the system as missing persons," Luna continued, her tone professional but not unkind. "If anything new comes up, any sighting, any evidence, we'll reopen immediately. But after 6 months with no leads beyond the car." I watched the house as she spoke, wondering if somewhere inside, behind one of those dark windows, my friends were trapped. Or worse. "Mr. Harper, Braden," Luna's voice softened slightly. "We've checked every angle. The house has been searched multiple times. The pond has been dragged. We've interviewed everyone who knew them. There's nothing more we can do right now." "I understand," I said, though I didn't. How could I explain what I knew? That the house had somehow taken them, that their phones had rung inside solid walls, that Scott's shoe had been pulled through a floor that couldn't possibly have a space beneath it. After ending the call, I sat there staring at the house for nearly an hour. Part of me wanted to walk back up that overgrown path, push open the front door, and demand the house return what it had taken. But another part, the part that woke up sweating most nights, knew better. I hadn't set foot in any abandoned building since that day. My camera gathered dust in my closet. The websites I'd frequented, filled with urban explorers sharing their latest conquests, remained unvisited in my browser history. The thought of entering another empty structure made my chest tighten, my breathing shallow. The nightmares had started about a week after the disappearance, always the same themes with slight variations. Mannequins turning their heads to watch me as I walked past, their jointed limbs moving when I looked away. Sometimes I'd dream I was trapped inside the walls of the house, able to hear people searching but unable to call out. The worst dreams were the ones where I heard Scott and Gary calling my name, begging for help, their voices muffled as if coming from behind plaster and wood. I'd wake up gasping for air, convinced for several terrifying seconds that I was still trapped in that house. I tried talking to Sophia about it once, calling her about 2 months after it happened. The conversation was brief and painful. "I can't, Braden," she'd said, her voice thin and strained. "I'm moving back to my parents' place in Oregon. I can't sleep here anymore. I keep thinking I hear things in the walls." "You're having the dreams too?" I'd asked. "I don't want to talk about it. I need to get away from here, from anything that reminds me." That was the last time we spoke. She changed her number after that. I looked her up online once and found she'd deleted all her social media accounts. It was like she was trying to erase herself, to become untraceable. I couldn't blame her. Sometimes I thought about doing the same thing. The worst part wasn't the nightmares or the guilt or even the loss of my friends. It was the knowledge that something impossible had happened in that house. Something that couldn't be explained by any rational means. I'd spent months researching, trying to find similar cases, looking for any scientific explanation for what we'd experienced. There was none. Phones don't ring inside solid walls. Shoes don't get pulled through floorboards. People don't vanish from locked rooms. And yet all of those things had happened. I was alone with this knowledge. Detective Luna had humored me at first, but I'd seen the shift in her eyes when I insisted on the impossibility of what had happened. The way she'd started asking about my sleep patterns, my stress levels, whether I was taking any medications. I started the car again, taking one last look at the house before pulling away. I wouldn't come back here again. There was nothing more to see, nothing more to learn. Whatever secrets the Whitmore house contained, it would keep them. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching me leave, patient and eternal, knowing that sooner or later someone else would come. Someone else would explore its rooms, discover its mannequins, hear the noises from upstairs. And maybe then I'd get a call from a number I recognized and hear nothing but static and distant voices on the other end. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, screen lighting up with a notification. I glanced over from where I'd been staring blankly at the wall for the past hour, debating whether to check it. These days, messages rarely brought good news. I reached for the phone, expecting another text from my mom asking if I was eating properly, or maybe Detective Luna with some bureaucratic follow-up about the now-closed case. Instead, I found a message from an unknown number, just an address, no other text, no explanation. I knew the address immediately, the Whitmore house. My thumb hovered over the delete button. I should block this number, forget I ever saw it. But something stopped me. What if it was Scott or Gary somehow reaching out? What if someone else had gone missing there? This is stupid, I muttered to myself, grabbing my keys from the hook by the door. The drive took 20 minutes. Each mile that brought me closer to the house made my grip on the steering wheel tighter. I hadn't been back since that day 6 months ago when I'd sworn never to return. Yet here I was, following a mysterious text like some horror movie character making the dumbest possible decision. I parked at the edge of the property, killing the headlights and sitting in darkness for several minutes. The house looked exactly as I remembered, a looming Victorian silhouette against the night sky. Windows like empty eye sockets watching me. The overgrown path leading to the front door seemed to be waiting for my return. Just a quick look, I told myself, grabbing my flashlight from the glove compartment. Find out who sent the text and leave. The beam of light bounced ahead of me as I made my way through the tangle of undergrowth. Each step felt heavier than the last. My breathing came quick and shallow, lungs not quite filling all the way. The silence was absolute. No crickets, no distant traffic, not even wind in the trees. The front porch creaked under my weight, boards sagging slightly. I paused at the door, flashlight beam trembling across the weathered wood. I hadn't expected it to be closed. Last time the police had been here, they'd secured the property with yellow tape and padlocks. Now it stood unbarred, as if waiting for me. I pushed it open with my fingertips, wincing at the low groan of hinges. The sound seemed to echo through the empty house, announcing my arrival. "Hello?" I called, then immediately regretted it. I didn't want anyone or anything to answer. The entrance hall looked exactly as we'd left it months ago. Same dusty chandelier overhead, same sheet-covered furniture, same grand staircase leading to the second floor. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing undisturbed dust on the floor except for what looked like old footprints, probably from the police investigation. But something was wrong. Something was missing. I moved toward the living room, sweeping my light across the space. The furniture remained. The fireplace stood cold and empty, but the mannequins that had filled the basement and hidden dining room were gone. Not a single one remained. "What the hell?" I whispered, moving quickly to the study where Sophia and I had found the hidden room. The bookshelf door stood partially open. I pushed it wider, shining my light inside. The oval dining table remained with its fine china and crystal glasses, but the 12 chairs sat empty. No mannequins in historical clothing, no frozen dinner party scene, just vacant chairs around a dusty table. I backed out of the room, a chill running up my spine. Where had they gone? There had been dozens of them, too many for someone to easily move, especially without leaving tracks in the dust. The basement. I needed to check the basement. I hurried to the kitchen, finding the brass key still in the lock of the heavy wooden door. Someone had been here before me. I turned the key and pulled the door open, pointing my flashlight down the stairs. "Hello?" I called again, hearing nothing but the echo of my own voice. I descended slowly, each step bringing back memories of mannequins arranged in lifelike scenes, but when I reached the bottom and swept my light across the finished room, I found it completely empty. No mannequins sitting at tables or standing against walls, no piano with figures gathered around it. The rooms that had contained themed scenes now stood bare. A floorboard creaked overhead. I froze, holding my breath, listening. Another creak, then another. Footsteps moving across the ceiling above me. "Police?" I called up, knowing it wasn't. The police had abandoned this place months ago. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, moving toward what I remembered as the second-floor hallway. I should leave. Every instinct screamed at me to run back to my car and drive away. But what if it was Scott or Gary? What if they had somehow returned? I climbed the basement stairs, crossed the kitchen, and made my way back to the entrance hall. The grand staircase loomed before me, darkness pooling at its top. "Scott?" I called, my voice breaking. "Gary?" No answer, but the footsteps continued overhead. I began to climb, flashlight beam bouncing wildly as my hand shook. The oppressive atmosphere I remembered from our first visit returned, the air growing thick and heavy with each step I took. The second-floor hallway stretched before me, doors lining both sides. Most stood open, revealing empty rooms with furniture covered in sheets. The footsteps had stopped. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. A soft thump came from the room at the end of the hall, what I remembered as a home office. I moved toward it slowly, flashlight trained on the partially open door. I pushed it open with my foot, sweeping the beam across the room. A desk stood against the far wall, facing away from the door, and sitting at the desk back to me was a figure. A mannequin. It wore Scott's clothes, the same jeans and flannel shirt he'd had on the day he disappeared. His dark brown hair, or a perfect replica of it, covered the back of its head. "Scott?" I whispered, knowing it couldn't be him, but unable to stop myself. I stepped into the room, moving around to see what the mannequin was facing. There was nothing but blank wall. No papers, no books, nothing to look at. My hand reached out, almost without my permission, and touched its shoulder. The mannequin's head began to turn, not like a person would turn, quick and natural, but slowly, mechanically, rotating on its neck until it faced me. It had Scott's face, every detail perfect. The small scar on his chin, the slight crookedness of his nose from a childhood break, even the pattern of stubble he always had. But the expression was wrong. Scott's warm, easygoing features were frozen in pure terror, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. I stumbled back, knocking into a small table behind me. The mannequin's arm twitched, just slightly. A small jerk of the fingers, then stillness again. "No," I gasped, backing toward the door. "No, no, no." I turned and ran, not caring about the noise I made. My feet pounded down the hallway, then down the grand staircase, taking the steps 2 and 3 at a time. I burst through the front door, across the porch, and down the overgrown path, branches whipping at my face as I sprinted toward my car. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the door. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and tried to start the engine. My hands shook so badly I missed the ignition twice before the key slid home. The car roared to life, headlights cutting through the darkness toward the house. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at an upstairs window, a mannequin with Scott's face watching me leave. Then my vision blurred. Breath coming in gasps that wouldn't fill my lungs. My chest felt like it was being crushed. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady myself, but the panic overwhelmed me. I slumped forward, forehead resting against the wheel as my body shook uncontrollably. Scott's face, that expression of terror, burned into my mind. The slight twitch of those fingers, the impossible rotation of that head. I don't know how long I sat there, fighting to breathe, fighting to think. When I finally raised my head and looked back at the house, the window stood empty. I drove to the police station the morning after finding Scott's mannequin face, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. I'd barely slept, Scott's frozen expression of terror playing on repeat behind my closed eyelids whenever I tried. The station looked so normal. Fluorescent lights, the smell of bad coffee, phones ringing, like the world hadn't completely changed. Detective Luna was at her desk when I walked in. She looked up, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to something like pity when she recognized me. "Braden," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I didn't expect to see you, especially not so early." I sat down, trying to organize my thoughts. How do you tell someone that your missing friend has been turned into a mannequin? "I went back to the house," I said. Her posture changed immediately, straightening in her chair. The Whitmore house? After I specifically told you the case was closed and the property was off limits? I got a text with the address. I thought maybe Scott or Gary was trying to reach out. She pulled out a notepad. Show me the text. I handed her my phone. She studied it for a moment, then handed it back. An unknown number. Could be anyone. That's not the point, I said, leaning forward. I went there and all the mannequins were gone except one. One that looked exactly like Scott, with his face, his clothes, his scar on his chin. And it moved. Its head turned to look at me. Detective Luna's expression didn't change as she wrote something in her notepad. Moved how? Like a machine. Slow. Mechanical. But it was him. It was Scott's face, frozen in this look of pure terror. She set down her pen and folded her hands on the desk. Braden, you've been through a traumatic experience. Your friends disappeared without explanation. The mind does strange things to cope with trauma. I'm not hallucinating, I cut in. I know what I saw. Did you take any pictures? Any evidence at all? I looked down at my hands. No. I ran. Of course you did, she said softly. Because what you experienced wasn't real. It was your mind processing grief, trying to make sense of something senseless. You think I'm making this up? My voice rose. A few officers glanced our way. I think you believe what you saw, she said carefully. But we've searched that house repeatedly. There are no mannequins there now. There's no evidence of what happened to your friends beyond Gary's car in the pond. I stood up, frustration burning through me. I'm going back. Tao stood up, frustration burning through me. I'm going back. I'll get proof this time. Braden, Detective Luna said, rising from her chair. I strongly advise against that. You're not thinking clearly. I've never thought more clearly in my life, I said, already backing toward the door. You'll see. She called after me, but I was already pushing through the station doors, a plan forming in my mind. If they needed evidence, I'd give them evidence they couldn't ignore. I drove home first, grabbed my video camera from the closet where it had sat unused for 6 months, and checked the battery, nearly full. I packed extra batteries anyway, along with a small flashlight and the 3 brass keys I'd kept hidden in my nightstand drawer. This time, I wouldn't run. This time, I'd document everything. The drive back to the Whitmore house felt shorter than it should have. The morning sun cast long shadows across the overgrown path as I parked in the same spot as last night. I sat in the car for a moment, steeling myself, then turned on the camera and held it up to my face. My name is Braden Harper. It's 9:30 in the morning on April 15th. I'm at the Whitmore house to document what I found last night, a mannequin with my friend Scott Quinn's face. I stepped out of the car, continuing to narrate as I walked toward the house. 6 months ago, my friends Scott Quinn and Gary Montgomery disappeared inside this house. Last night, I found what I believe is Scott, transformed somehow into a mannequin. The front door was still unlocked, just as I'd left it. I pushed it open with my foot, keeping the camera steady as I moved into the entrance hall. Dust motes floated in the morning light, streaming through the windows. The house was silent. The mannequin was upstairs, in the office at the end of the hall, I said to the camera, my voice sounding too loud in the empty space. I climbed the stairs, each creak making me wince. At the top, I panned the camera down the hallway. All the doors stood open, just as they had been last night. I moved toward the office, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it would be audible on the recording. The office door was ajar. I pushed it open with my fingertips. The room was empty. No mannequin, no Scott. Just a desk facing the wall, a chair, and dust. It was here, I said, my voice cracking. Right here, sitting in this chair, wearing Scott's clothes. I turned in a slow circle, filming every corner of the room. Nothing. I checked the closet. Empty. Under the desk. Nothing. For the next hour, I searched every room in the house, filming continuously. The basement where dozens of mannequins had once stood in frozen tableaus. Empty. The hidden dining room behind the bookshelf. The table and place settings remained, but the chairs sat vacant. Not a single mannequin anywhere in the house. I lowered the camera, confusion and doubt creeping in. Had I imagined it? Was Luna right? No. I knew what I'd seen. I returned to the first floor, filming the living room with its sheet-covered furniture. As I approached the fireplace, something caught my eye. A small section of the brick looked different from the rest. I crouched down, setting the camera on a nearby table, but making sure it was still recording. The loose brick moved when I touched it. Behind it was a small cavity, and inside, a book. A journal, from the look of it, bound in cracked leather with yellowed pages. I pulled it out, brushing off decades of soot and dust. The first entry was dated March 12th, 1903. My dearest Elizabeth has vanished within these walls. I read aloud for the camera. The others insist she must have wandered off, but I know better. I saw what became of her. A perfect likeness in painted wood and cloth. Her eyes forever frozen in that last moment of terror. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Different handwriting, different inks, different decades. But the same story, over and over. People entering the house. People disappearing. People transformed into mannequins. An entry from 1957. They think I'm mad when I tell them James hasn't run off but stands now in the basement, still as death yet somehow aware. Another from 1972. The mannequins move when no one is watching. They follow with their eyes. My sister is among them now. And the most recent, dated October 10th, 2008. My son Michael, my beautiful boy, his face in wood and paint, his eyes still pleading for help. The Thompson family, the last owners before us. I read entry after entry, the horrible truth becoming clearer with each page. The house didn't just make people disappear. It transformed them into mannequins, trapping them in a state between life and death. And somehow, over time, they disappeared again, only to be replaced by new victims. Scott and Gary hadn't left. They'd been transformed, just like all the others before them. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around. The journal clutched to my chest and froze. Where the entrance hall had been empty minutes before, mannequins now stood in a semicircle around me. Dozens of them, blocking the front door, the stairs, every possible exit. Their blank faces all turned toward me, watching. I scrambled backward, knocking over a side table. The camera toppled to the floor but continued recording as I pressed myself against the fireplace. "Stay back," I whispered, knowing how ridiculous it sounded. They didn't move, just stood there, watching with their painted eyes. I looked for Scott among them, for Gary, for any face I recognized, but these mannequins were different, featureless, with smooth, blank faces like unfinished dolls. The journal, the camera. I needed to get out with the evidence. I spotted a window to my left, partially covered by a dusty curtain. If I could reach it. I lunged sideways, expecting the mannequins to grab me, but they remained motionless. I yanked at the window latch, stuck with decades of paint. I glanced back. The mannequins had turned to face me but hadn't moved closer. I grabbed a heavy bookend from a nearby shelf and smashed it against the window. The glass cracked but didn't break. I hit it again, harder. This time it shattered, sending shards flying outward. I didn't hesitate. I shoved the journal into my jacket pocket, grabbed the camera from the floor, and dove through the window. Glass caught my arm, my leg, my face, sharp, burning pain as it sliced through clothing and skin. I landed hard on the overgrown grass below, the breath knocked from my lungs. blood soaked through my sleeve, but I didn't stop to check the damage. I ran, stumbling over roots and fallen branches toward my car. Only when I was inside with the doors locked did I look back at the house. Mannequins stood at every window, their blank faces watching me leave. My hand shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. Blood dripped onto the seat as I reversed out of the clearing and sped down the dirt path. I didn't go to the police station. I didn't go to the hospital, despite the deep gash in my forearm that probably needed stitches. Instead, I drove to the old quarry outside of town. There, with my arm wrapped in my torn shirt, I sat in my car and watched the video footage. It showed everything. My search through the empty house, the discovery of the journal, my reading of the entries. And then, in the background, while I was focused on the journal, they appeared. One by one, mannequins silently filling the room behind me, moving when the camera wasn't directly on them, freezing when it was. No one would believe this. No one could believe this. I took the journal and the camera to the edge of the quarry. With shaking hands, I removed the memory card from the camera and snapped it in half. I tore the pages from the journal and lit them with my car lighter, watching as the decades of horrific testimonies curled and blackened in the flames. When nothing remained but ashes, I scattered them into the quarry and threw the camera and empty journal binding after them. Some truths were too terrible to share. I cleaned and bandaged my cuts as best I could at home, then spent the next few days in a daze, packing my belongings and putting my apartment up for rent. I told my mother I'd gotten a job offer in Seattle, 3,000 miles away from the Whitmore house. A week later, I was on a plane, leaving everything behind. That was 2 months ago. I have a small apartment now, a job at a local coffee shop. I try to pretend everything is normal. But at night, I still dream of mannequins, of Scott's face frozen in terror, of Gary somewhere in that house watching with painted eyes. Sometimes my phone rings, showing Scott's number or Gary's. I never answer anymore. I know what I'd hear, static and distant voices trapped between worlds. I live with the knowledge that the Whitmore house still stands, waiting for new visitors, new victims. That my friends remain eternally trapped within its walls, existing in a state neither fully alive nor dead. And that no matter how far I run, a part of me will always be trapped there too, in that moment when I understood the truth. The house collects people. It transforms them, and it never, ever lets them go.